It is almost every single day that I have to have a difficult conversation with one of my clients about an expensive auto repair that could have been avoided. So it's very common that inconvenient and very expensive failure is caused by something that started out as kind of a smaller problem, and had it been addressed soon enough, would have avoided coming in on a tow truck and a very expensive conversation with your favorite auto repair guy. So I want to give you three main bullet points that will hopefully help you avoid inconvenient breakdowns and very expensive auto repairs. So the number one thing I need you guys to do to avoid very expensive failures is to pay attention to your gauges. The two gauges I want you to pay the most attention to is a temperature gauge or a temperature warning, and an oil pressure gauge and an oil pressure warning. It is very uncommon for an engine to fail just out of a sheer mechanical failure. There's usually a cause. So the number one cause of engine repairs is overheating. So letting a simple coolant leak go too long to where the coolant level gets low, car overheats while somebody's driving, they drive it too long, needs an engine. Happens fast. Oil leaks, people let an oil leak go too long, causes low oil situation, causes the engine to fail as well. But the number one cause of engine failure is overheating. So paying attention to those gauges, if you notice something abnormal, you don't even have to wait for it to get all the way to hot. If you know my car usually runs here in the middle, my car is now running at 3/4 of the gauge. Let's get that looked into until it gets driven all the way into the red, ends up coming in and needing an engine. If you have either of the warnings, so if you have a temperature warning or you have an oil pressure warning, you've got seconds, not minutes. So if your car gets to the point of touching the red on overheating, you got to get off to the side of the road. As soon as it is safe, turn that engine off, call for a tow truck. Same thing with oil pressure. It's a matter of seconds. If your vehicle gets low enough on oil pressure to where it's in the red or the warning light's coming on, within seconds, hopefully it's safe enough to get off the side of the road, turn it off, call for a tow truck. Continuing to drive with either of those warnings will lead to an engine failure. The last warning I want you to look at outside your temperature and oil pressure gauge is your check engine light. There's two different stages to your check engine light. There are hundreds of things that can cause your check engine light to come on that still leaves your vehicle in a safe spot to continue to drive. So just because your check engine light's on doesn't mean you need to pull over and panic or anything. Check engine light on solid, reach out to a shop, get it scheduled within the next few days, you'll be just fine. Now, if your check engine light comes on and is flashing, that is telling you, hey, pay attention to me, there is expensive damage happening. So check engine light flashing means the vehicle's running poor enough to where it's actually causing damage to the catalyst system, which is a very expensive system. It means it's running poor enough to where your car thinks that you should probably not drive it anymore. So check engine light flashing, pull off the side of the road as soon as it's safe, turn it off, call for a tow truck, get it into your auto repair shop. So the number two thing that you can do to avoid inconvenient breakdowns and high cost of auto repair is to just use your senses as you're driving. So my vehicles very rarely need, not to jinx myself, my vehicles very rarely need major repairs. But with all the vehicles I own between my shop and my home, my cars are always in the shop for something. But it's important to just catch things while they're small before they turn into something big. So if you're driving down the road and you're starting to feel something you haven't felt before, reach out to somebody you trust to run it by them, get it inspected, whatever it might be. If you're seeing something, you're driving your vehicle and gauges look different than they normally do, or you're seeing a puff of smoke from under the hood, seeing a puff of smoke from the back, let's get that looked at before it completely fails. When you walk out to your garage where your car usually parks, if you're seeing a puddle or something, let's get that looked into. If you're driving down the road and you feel something, you're hearing a new clunk, a new vibration, something feels weird when you hit the brakes, whatever it might be. As you're driving your vehicle, pay attention, and anything that's different, make note of it and run it by somebody that's experienced, or run it by your auto repair shop. I can't stress it enough how much little things usually turn into a bigger problem. By the time they usually get to us, it's kind of like us with going to the doctor, right? It starts out with a little tickle in the back of our throat, and then we just ignore it until we're bedridden with pneumonia, right? Same thing can happen with your car. Don't ignore these little symptoms until they turn into a failure where you're coming in on a tow truck and buying very expensive parts from your favorite auto repair guy. Okay, the last thing I want to talk to you about, I talk about this all the time, but I'm very passionate about it. It's very important to have your vehicle inspected very regularly. So regularly means about every 5,000 miles on an older vehicle, about every 10,000 miles on a newer vehicle. I consider newer vehicle about 5 to 10 years old only, something like that. Older vehicle, 10 years or older. So every 5 to 10,000 miles, not only should you be changing the oil, but whenever your car's due for an oil change, please have somebody experienced take a look at it, whether that's you or somebody you trust. So some instances on why it's so important to have your vehicle inspected and why I would be talking about that in a video about how to lower your cost of auto repairs. Once again, it's very common for a smaller problem to turn into a bigger problem. So cooling system, okay. A lot of the cars, we got a BMW over there in the corner. They use, the new hoses they use just have an O-ring and a clip to where they quick connect on. Very common in our temperature here where we get hot and cold for that O-ring to start to shrink and cause a little bit of a coolant leak. Not a big deal. Let's say we'll spend a couple $100 worth of time and coolant and parts to pop that hose off, change the O-rings and put it all back together, fill it with coolant, pressure test it. Not a big deal. But what commonly happens is people drive it with that hose leaking a little bit of coolant for long enough, then the coolant level gets low, then it gets overheated, then it comes in needing a $10,000 engine instead of a $200 hose because it didn't get caught in time or it didn't get noticed. Steering parts. You're driving around and you've got a control arm bushing or a tie rod that has a little bit of play in it, and you continue to drive. Then you finally get it to the shop. Hey, look at this, my tire looks a little funny. They look at it, and now not only do you need that suspension part, but you drove it long enough to where it wore out a tire. You've got an all-wheel drive vehicle, now you got to replace all 4 tires and a steering part. So once again, instead of say a $600 steering and suspension repair, now you're buying a $600 steering or suspension repair and a $1,000 set of tires, right? So you can kind of see how catching things in time can hopefully avoid failures of other parts. And I can go on and on about this. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've seen $500 oil leak get ignored to where then it leaks enough oil, soaks engine mounts, soaks the belt, soaks all other kinds of other things, and then the car has, instead of needing a $500 oil leak repair, it comes into the shop, needs a $500 oil leak repair, and it needs another $1,000 worth of parts because it's been leaking oil all over parts that weren't designed to have oil on them. So you can kind of see the trend there. I know our industry is known for, hey, I'm going to take my car into the shop for this one thing. They're going to check it and tell me I need 5 things. I get it. It's important that you find somewhere you trust so that you understand that, hey, if we're checking your whole car when it comes in, not only do I do it on every car I have, especially the cars that my wife and kids drive, they get a very thorough inspection every time they come in. So the same thing I do for my wife and kids on their car, I do for my customers' cars. And yes, that might mean you brought your car in for one thing, and I'm going to tell you there's 3 other things you need to do either today or over the next little while. But at least you have the information, and then you can choose whether you do those or not. But by just ignoring these things and not having somebody inspect your vehicle doesn't mean they're not there. It just means you don't know about them, and you're probably not going to know until you're coming in on a tow truck and spending a lot of money in a shop like ours.